In the dead of night, deep over Russian airspace, alarms began to scream across a radar station that wasn't supposed to be vulnerable. Minutes later, Ukrainian drones slipped through a gap the Kremlin didn't even know existed, heading straight for the eyes of Russia's early warning network. What happened next would expose one of Moscow's most guarded weaknesses. They appeared on radar for less than 3 seconds, small, erratic returns that most operators would have dismissed as clutter. But at 2:47 local time, a Russian patrol boat off Crimea's coast locked onto something that shouldn't have been there at all. Multiple fast-moving objects heading directly toward one of the most heavily protected air defense zones in the Black Sea region. Within minutes, those faint echoes would expose a flaw buried deep inside Russia's entire air defense system, a weakness Ukraine was about to exploit with surgical precision. Operators aboard the vessel watched their radar feed flicker as the first tracks approached. The signal was unstable, jumping in and out, but it was enough to trigger a high-priority alert. Controllers ordered an immediate intercept. 5 surface-to-air missiles launched in rapid succession, tearing into the night sky. 30 million rubles worth of precision weapons fired at what looked like incoming cruise missiles. But as the smoke cleared, the targets were still there, small, steady, and completely unharmed. Ukraine's FP-5 drones had just crossed into Crimean airspace, and none of Russia's multi-million ruble defenses had managed to stop them. Their target was Mount I Petri, one of the most important radar sites in southern Crimea, a command post that formed the backbone of Russia's air defense coverage across the peninsula. If Ukraine could blind it, every S-400 battery in the region would be effectively useless. But to reach it, the drones first had to survive a gauntlet of defenses that, on paper, should have made such an attack impossible. Below the approaching drones, a Panzer S-1 system swiveled its radar antenna, trying to lock onto the incoming swarm. The Panzer wasn't some outdated relic. It was one of Russia's most modern point defense platforms, specifically designed to shoot down low-flying missiles and drones. Yet its operator was facing a problem that training manuals never covered. Seconds earlier, he'd launched multiple missiles, each guided by the radar's fire control beam, and not a single one had hit. Now his only option was to switch to the system's twin 30mm autocannons, filling the sky with tracer fire. The shells arced through the night, bright streaks cutting across darkness, and missed completely. The reason was buried in physics. The Ukrainian drones were flying perpendicular to the radar beam at precisely 50 meters altitude. That flight path placed them inside what radar specialists call the Doppler notch. Because radar doesn't just detect position, but also velocity relative to the receiver, any object moving directly sideways across the radar beam generates a near-zero Doppler shift. To the radar's computer, the drones appeared motionless, indistinguishable from ground clutter. The system automatically filtered them out. The problem compounded as radar energy bounced off the sea below, creating mirrored ghost targets under each drone. The computer tried to average both reflections, effectively telling the guidance system to aim between them, at empty air. The proximity fuses, calibrated to detonate when near an object with at least half a square meter of radar reflection, found nothing solid to trigger on. These drones returned less than 1/100th of that signature. The missiles literally couldn't recognize them as valid targets. More drones appeared on the thermal feed, multiple flight paths converging from different directions, a mechanical swarm approaching the mountain. The Panzer tracked them briefly, but its engagement envelope worked against it. Its missiles required 1.5 kilometers of flight distance to arm, and at the drone's closing rate of roughly 40 meters per second, the operator had only 12 seconds from first detection to visual contact. 12 seconds to identify, aim, lock, and fire on targets his system was never designed to see. Russian radio networks erupted in chaos. Control centers demanded updates. Operators shouted about missile malfunctions, about invisible targets, about systems that refused to lock. Within minutes, it became clear. These weren't the kind of threats Russian doctrine had prepared for. They weren't stealth bombers or cruise missiles. They were small electric drones, moving too slowly and too irregularly for the systems to classify them as threats, yet fast enough to overwhelm defenses designed for aircraft. At 2:50 hours, the first drone corrected course, lining up on one of the dome structures that topped Mount I Petri. Beneath those domes sat radars worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Strategic assets capable of tracking ballistic missiles in space and monitoring the skies over the entire Black Sea. Their reinforced shells were built to resist 2,000-pound bombs dropped from 30,000 feet. But no one had ever tested how they'd fare against a drone carrying a shaped charge barely larger than a dinner plate. Meanwhile, a call went out to nearby air bases. Within minutes, a Su-30SM fighter was airborne, racing toward the mountain. The twin-engine jet, Russia's answer to the American F-15, was equipped with thrust vectoring engines and an advanced BARS radar system, said to track small objects at extreme range. But as the pilot approached the combat zone, his screen filled with flickering returns. Drones appeared for one radar sweep, vanished the next. The system required 5 consistent returns to confirm a track. It was getting 2 or 3 at best. Below that threshold, the radar simply discarded the data as noise. That noise floor, the baseline level of electromagnetic interference that every radar system naturally produces, was swallowing the drones whole. Their radar signature was smaller than a bird, and their reflective surfaces were scattered composites, diffusing radar energy instead of returning it cleanly. The BARS radar couldn't lock them long enough to build a track file, forcing the pilot to rely on visual targeting. He fired anyway, an R-73 heat-seeking missile streaking into the night. The launch cost another 20 million rubles. The drone's onboard thermal camera recorded the entire engagement. The missile closed fast, its seeker head scanning for heat, then veered off at the last second. The R-73 was designed to home in on jet engines producing temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. The drone's electric motor ran at maybe 50. The infrared seeker couldn't see it until it was within 500 meters, by which time it was moving too fast to maneuver effectively. The pilot fired again and again. Each missile was tracked for a moment before losing lock. Even pulling 40 grams at Mach 2.5, the missile's turning radius remained over half a kilometer. Against targets changing direction every few seconds, it was useless. By the time the pilot had expended 4 missiles and hundreds of 30mm cannon rounds, the drones were already inside the mountain's perimeter. Not a single hit. His radar still showed erratic contacts, but new ones were appearing from somewhere that made no sense. 10 kilometers off the coast in open water, more tracks suddenly materialized. The data indicated new launches from sea level, inside what should have been clear radar coverage. The realization came too late. Russia's Podlyat K-1 radar on Mount Ipatri could detect high-altitude aircraft at ranges of up to 300 kilometers, but it had a limitation that no software patch could fix. Geometry. Sitting at roughly 1,100 meters elevation with a minimum depression angle of -2 degrees, the radar physically couldn't detect anything below 43 meters altitude within 10 kilometers of shore. That blind zone, created simply by Earth's curvature and the radar's position, had just become Ukraine's launch corridor. The small, uncrewed boats floating there, nearly invisible against the sea, were actually drone relay and launch platforms, part of Ukraine's increasingly sophisticated Ursula unmanned surface vehicle program. These boats had been stationed off Crimea for hours, disguised as civilian traffic. Moving at under 15 knots, they fell beneath radar filters programmed to ignore slow-moving surface clutter. Each vessel carried multiple FPV drones and tall communications masts linked to secure Starlink terminals. Operators hundreds of kilometers away, and possibly in Odessa, sent encrypted control signals to the relay boats, which then transmitted local radio commands to the drones. The video feeds returned via the same route, allowing real-time control with virtually no latency. This relay system allowed Ukraine to conduct complex strikes far beyond direct radio range. Instead of relying on a single long-distance signal easily jammed or blocked by terrain, the boats acted like floating network nodes, extending coverage deep into Russian-occupied territory. With just 3 to 5 such relays, Ukrainian forces could coordinate dozens of simultaneous drone attacks across the Crimean Peninsula while keeping human operators safely out of range. As dawn approached, the relay boats began launching a second wave. Dozens of drones rose into the early light, scattering across the sea before converging on Mount Ipatri. They didn't form predictable attack formations. Instead, they flew randomized flight paths, blending into radar noise until their final approach. Russian coastal radars, pre-programmed to disregard low-speed maritime traffic, failed to flag the vessels as threats. To every automated system scanning the Black Sea that morning, these were just fishing boats. By 2:59, the first drones reached their targets. The 96L6E cheeseboard radar, responsible for providing target acquisition data to S-400 surface-to-air missile batteries, was the first to go. A shaped charge detonated against its antenna array, sending a jet of molten copper through sensitive electronics at 8 kilometers per second. Circuits vaporized instantly. The radar that could track 100 targets at once was now little more than burning metal. Seconds later, another dome, the Nebo-M radar, took a direct hit. The Nebo system was one of Russia's most advanced early warning assets, designed to detect stealth aircraft using long-wavelength VHF bands. It formed the core of Russia's anti-stealth capability, theoretically capable of spotting an F-35 at 600 kilometers. Without it, every air defense battery across Crimea lost the ability to see beyond 40 kilometers. In practical terms, they were blind. Additional drones slammed into the Podlyat K-1 low-altitude radar array, severing the final piece of the defensive network. The Podlyat was crucial for detecting low-flying cruise missiles or drones skimming the terrain, the exact kind of threat now tearing through Russian defenses. Within seconds of impact, its transmitter sections were engulfed in fire. The entire low-altitude coverage of Crimea vanished from Russian screens. 3 kilometers away, a Russian BK-16 landing craft attempted to intervene. Its crew opened fire with heavy machine guns and autocannons, trying to intercept the drones mid-flight. But their navigation radar wasn't designed to calculate ballistic trajectories. The crew was effectively shooting blind. One drone impacted the vessel's bow, detonating on contact and destroying the forward deck. The thermal feed is cut to static. Back on Mount I. Petrie, chaos unfolded. With the radar network destroyed, the S-400 batteries ringing Crimea could no longer coordinate their engagement sequences. The system's long-range missiles depended on external tracking data from high-altitude and VHF radars. Without those, their range was limited to what their onboard radar could see, roughly 40 kilometers. In practical terms, their effective engagement envelope had collapsed by over 90%. Moments later, the command bunker itself was hit. The I. Petrie command post housed servers, encrypted communications, and control nodes for Western Crimea's entire air defense grid. A final drone struck the reinforced entrance, breaching the door and detonating inside. Fire erupted, followed by secondary explosions as fuel stores and ammunition cooked off. Within minutes, the entire structure was engulfed in flames. The air defense coordination network that had once controlled Crimea's skies no longer existed. By the time the sun rose over the peninsula, Russian forces had lost nearly every major radar asset in western Crimea. The 96L6E, Nebo-M, and Podlyat K-1 arrays, together worth hundreds of millions of dollars, once were reduced to debris. The Su-30 pilot returned to base with 0 confirmed kills. The Panzer S-1 crews reported ammunition expended, 0 interceptions. In a matter of 20 minutes, an entire segment of Russia's integrated air defense system had been rendered useless by drones costing less than $1,000 each. The attack demonstrated more than just Ukraine's growing technical sophistication. It revealed the structural weaknesses baked into Russia's air defense doctrine, a reliance on radar systems optimized for conventional threats, and an underestimation of small, low-observable targets that operate outside traditional engagement envelopes. It also showed how Ukraine's innovation, blending consumer electronics, asymmetric tactics, and networked communications, could defeat systems designed to stop the most advanced weapons in the world. In purely military terms, this was one of the most effective electronic and kinetic strikes of the war. By destroying those radar assets, Ukraine didn't just remove eyes from Crimea's sky. It opened corridors for future operations, both manned and unmanned. For the first time in years, the Western Black Sea's airspace was transparent from Odessa's command centers. Russia's response would come later. New radar deployments, reinforced command posts, more electronic countermeasures. But the damage was already done. The myth of impenetrable defenses had been broken by a handful of drones flying barely above the waves. For a few minutes before dawn, physics, ingenuity, and audacity had rewritten the balance of the Black Sea. And when the smoke cleared over Mount Ipetri, Crimea's defenders finally saw what had really struck them. Not stealth bombers, not missiles, but small, improvised machines powered by laptop batteries and controlled through floating relays. The future of warfare had just arrived. Quiet, cheap, and unstoppable.